Now, Western Sydney literacy movement Sweatshop has released a new publication which showcases 39 stories by Indigenous writers and writers of colour.
Titled Racism, Stories on Fear, Hate and Bigotry, the writers share their personal experiences of racism, xenophobia and prejudice. We're joined now by Winnie Dunn, who is the General Manager of Sweatshop Literacy Movement, and we're also joined by Nour, who is a contributing writer. Welcome to both of you. Congratulations on having a book.
Good morning.
Winnie, in the introduction to the book, you say that you wanted to set the record straight. On what exactly?
This book is to set the record straight on racism in Australia and what racism looks like in this country. And so 39 diverse writers, very talented, have come together to speak to their own experiences of what it means to grow up as culturally and linguistically diverse here in Australia. And we are also blessed to have an Indigenous contribution as well. We can't talk about racism without talking about the plight of First Nations people. So First Nations first always, but setting the record straight on racism is the most important conversation we can have in this country right now.
It's a very strong introduction. I must say that when I read the first few words, I was a little bit taken aback. You start off with Australia is a racist country, and then you go on to list, recent Australian events in recent Australian history, the Cronulla riots, the Brereton report on the Afghan killings, Indigenous deaths in custody as well. Who do you think will read this book?
I think this is a book for all Australians, and so I think all Australians should take a moment to reflect and read this book. You can buy it on sweatshop.ws because I think it really holds up a mirror to our current experiences, and we can only enact change if we're looking at ourselves and reflecting and coming together and saying, racism, it stops with us, and with the Human Rights Commission and the government trying to change the policy and the specific wordings, I think now more than ever is the conversation. This is the conversation we need to be having.
Daniel, you contributed a chapter to this book. What's your story about?
Well, it's set on the campus of UWS, the University of Western Sydney, where in primary school I was involved in a competition called Tournament of the Minds. All of the nerdy, slightly precocious, children of my year were. But I was really only, one of very few young people of colour in that group. And as the competition went on, I realised I was being ignored, I wasn't being given a chance to speak. And the story kind of unpacks my father kind of rising to my defence and confronting the deputy principal walking into the school office.
Loved your chapter, and it was, it talks about the embarrassment of having ethnic parents, and just before we came on air, we were talking about this specific skill, I think, that ethnic parents do have in terms of embarrassing their
humiliating their children. Yes,
right.
I can see in your eyes,
Fuzzy,
there's a shared kind of trauma.
They don't mean to, but it is. Now,
yes.
I want to quote from your story, and you describe entering the Uni of Western Sydney hallway with your Egyptian dad. I think I hear someone laughing at us. But it's just a kookaburra. I wish my father looked like the white preacher dad from Seventh Heaven, and I looked like Jack Scully from Neighbours. Do you think all ethnic kids feel that way?
I think when you're not seen, when you're not reflected back to yourself, you manufacture a vision of the kind of life or the kind of persona that you wish you had. Unfortunately, in this country, we know that arts practitioners do not reflect the population. A diversity report in 2017, I think, said that something like 40% of Australians have a non-Anglo background, a diverse background, where only 10% of professionals working in the arts industry are actually diverse people of colour. And so, of course, we develop these fantasies that don't actually reflect necessarily who we are, and we don't play to our strengths. I am clearly not a blonde person from Neighbours, great as the script writing is. And yet, we have this fake or this false idea of an ideal that I don't think does us justice. Yeah.
It's interesting as well, that's where this book comes in, I guess, because that's where these stories of real experiences are told, but also that's what's being then read by other people. So those stories are being seen by young people in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, speaking of young people, I just want to take a moment to thank Campbelltown City Library, because we worked with young people from Campbelltown, which is a suburb in southwest Sydney, and, you know, they spoke about what it means to be Australian. And these are kind of very low socioeconomic kids that come from that background, and for them to be able to tell their own story and to see themselves mirrored in the stories that they were writing and in this collection. You know, African-American scholar and feminist Bell Hooks talks about the power of mirroring and what it means to see yourself in literature and in the arts and on television. That power and that representation then changes the way that we see ourselves. And so the fact that we're even having a conversation and young people who are about 12, 13 are writing about what it means to be Australian, I think is a really great chance for Australia to get to know itself a bit better.
And the stories themselves are so funny, are so nuanced, you know, sometimes full of rage. There's irony. These are good stories. This is excellent literature that will move you. And this is just a superb anthology. So I think every Australian interested in good writing should just do themselves the benefit of getting this book.
Daniel, what do you think the general population doesn't get about racism?
I think racism, I think it was Toni Morrison who said that racism or violence tends to like present itself maybe in this extravagant way, that it's going to come on with a top hat, you know, and do a big dance. That's not what racism is. Racism is a series of small, frustrating moments. It's not being seen. It's being overlooked in a job interview for someone else just because your name is a little different. It's these subtle, myriad, I suppose, microaggressions that in the end amount to this injustice. The point is we have to be part of the conversation. We have to be at the table. And that's the only way that we can begin to, I guess, qualify our humanity. And also to begin to make policy changes that allow us to be more visible in every field. That's what racism is.
And the word racism can be quite confronting.
Yes,
But
yes,
all
yes.
it simply means is that one race is being privileged over the other. So when we just think about that on those most basic terms, it just becomes something that we can define and then something that we can overcome. Rather than taking it personally, it's about, okay, what are these systemic problems that we have, and how can we create a more equal and just society.
Yeah, and it's important to make that distinction, I think, because some people watching this might think, well, I'm Australian and I'm not racist. And
Sure.
it's confronting to hear Australia is a racist country.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having this conversation. Uncomfortable conversations are often the most fruitful and the most necessary.
Yeah, and all we have to do is look at the statistics. I mean, 2 years ago, we had an Australian-born white supremacist who went to Christchurch and killed 51 peacefully praying Muslims. And, you know, that's quite a mirror on Australia and kind of where we are with the race debate. You know, we had Premier Gladys Berejiklian in January say that Australia doesn't have a problem with racism. And so if these are the people in power, and if also these are the everyday people that can be incentivised and extreme, go to those levels of extremes, I think it's important we have the conversation about racism and not take it personally. Just think of it as, what can I do to make a better society for all of us?
Well, I think this is a great book in order to spark that conversation as well. Guys, thank you so much for coming
thank
in.
you.
Thank you so much.
It's
been a pleasure.
Winnie Dunn and Daniel Nour. Thank you.
Thank you.
Best
Thanks a
with
lot.